Welcome to Fearen Fear Files once again. I got a lot of good videos lined up, but today I got Akhenaten. Who is Akhenaten? We don't know. Let's find out. They say that he's an alien, he's God. I don't know. But I got this video on him, and I want to find out for myself. Let's try it out and see what's going on.
In the desert of Middle Egypt, about 300 kilometers south of Cairo, there is a stretch of ground that should be empty. It isn't. Because under the sand lies a city. Not a village, not a single temple, a capital. Streets, palaces, government offices, sculptors' workshops, mansions with gardens, and homes for thousands of workers. An entire city planned and built from nothing, on land where nothing had stood before. And then, almost as suddenly as it appeared, it was abandoned, emptied, left to the sand. The whole story, from first stone to ghost town, fits inside a single human lifetime, roughly one generation. There is almost nothing else like it in the ancient world. Cities usually grow slowly over centuries, layer on layer. This one was switched on and then switched off. The man who built it was a pharaoh, one of the most powerful rulers Egypt ever produced. And yet, if you look at the official Egyptian king lists carved a few decades later, you will not find his name. Where he should be, there is a gap, a deliberate silence. The kings who came after him called him the enemy, the criminal. They tore his city apart and tried to erase him from history completely, to make it as if he had never existed at all. They had the power to do it. They had the time. They had every reason. And here we are, thousands of years later, still saying his name. This is the story of Akhenaten, the king Egypt tried to forget, and the city, the desert, refused to give up. To understand how strange what he did really was, you first have to understand the Egypt he inherited. This is the 18th dynasty, around 1350 BCE. Egypt is not just a kingdom. It is the richest, most powerful empire on earth. Its reach stretches from deep in Nubia in the south to the edge of Syria in the north. Gold flows in from the desert mines. Tribute flows in from conquered lands. The temples are overflowing. And that last word, temples, is where the real story begins. Because in Egypt, power did not belong to the king alone. For centuries, the priesthood of the god Amun, based at the great temple of Karnak in Thebes, had been growing. Every victory, every grateful pharaoh had handed them more. More land, more gold, more grain, more people. By now, the priests of Amun controlled vast estates and a fortune that rivaled the throne itself. They crowned kings and spoke for the gods. They had become an empire inside the empire. A young prince named Amenhotep grows up inside this world. He is not the heir. He has an older brother meant for the throne, and he is a second son, easy to overlook, kept to the side of the royal story. And then his brother dies. The overlooked son becomes Amenhotep IV, and from somewhere, no one fully understands where, he has arrived at an idea that will set him against the most powerful institution in his kingdom. The question hanging over Egypt was simple and dangerous. Who really rules here, the king or the priests of Amun? Akhenaten was about to answer it. For the first few years, Amenhotep IV rules much like his father. But something is shifting. He begins to raise up a god that, until now, had been minor, the Aten. Not a human-shaped god with the head of a falcon or a jackal. Not a statue hidden in a dark sanctuary. The Aten is the visible disk of the sun itself. Light, warmth, the thing that makes life possible, shining down on everyone equally. At first, the Aten simply grows in importance. Then it rises above everything. And then the king does something no pharaoh had ever done. He doesn't just promote his god. He begins to push the others aside. Funding to other temples is cut, and the great rival, Amun, god of the Karnak priesthood, is singled out. His name is chiseled out of inscriptions across Egypt. His temples are closed. The empire inside the empire has its income switched off, and the king changes his own name. Amenhotep means Amun is content. He will not carry the name of a god he is dismantling. He renames himself Akhenaten, he who is effective for the Aten. With his own hand, the king erases his old self. For centuries, people have asked one huge question about this moment. Is this the first time in recorded history that a human being insists there is really only one God worth worshipping? The first monotheist? Scholars still argue. Some say yes. Others say it was closer to lifting one God far above the rest than to denying the others exist. But there is a second, stranger question that has followed Akhenaten for 3,000 years, one we will come back to. Not only was he the first believer in a single God, was he, in some sense, a prophet? Before we follow him into the desert, we have to talk about his face. Because the moment Akhenaten took power, something bizarre happened to Egyptian art, and to the way the king allowed himself to be shown. For 3,000 years, pharaohs had been carved the same way. Broad shoulders, flat stomach, perfect, athletic, ageless, godlike bodies. It was a visual language of power, and nobody broke it. Akhenaten broke it on day one. In his statues, he appears almost alien. A long, narrow face, a pointed chin, heavy, slanted eyes, full, drooping lips, a thin neck, and below that, a body no pharaoh had ever allowed. A soft, rounded belly, wide hips, full thighs, almost no hard muscle. Some of the colossal statues from his early reign are so strange that the people who first dug them up weren't sure what they were looking at. So what was wrong with the king? For over a century, people have proposed answers. One school looks for a medical explanation, a genetic disorder that reshaped his body. Names get thrown around: Marfan syndrome, Froelich's syndrome, and others. The problem is that several of these conditions would have made it nearly impossible for him to father children, and he fathered at least 6 daughters. The DNA work done on his likely family has found no clear proof of these diseases. So there is a second explanation, and most Egyptologists now lean toward it. The strange body was not a sickness. It was a message. If the Aten was the single source of all life, father and mother of everything, then perhaps the king, the Aten's living image on earth, had to be shown as both male and female at once. Not deformed, deliberately, meaningfully strange. And then there are the wilder rumors that the elongated skulls in Amarna art prove Akhenaten wasn't human at all, that he came from somewhere else. It makes for a great story, but there is no evidence for it, and those skulls almost certainly belong to the same artistic style as everything around them. There were even old whispers about his bloodline, about his mother, Queen T, and, centuries later, claims tying him to Moses and the birth of monotheism itself. We will keep the strongest of those threads and let the weakest go. Whatever the truth was, Akhenaten clearly wanted to be seen as something the world had never seen before, and he was about to build a city to match. Thebes was Amun's city. Its temples, its priests, its memory, all of it belonged to the god Akhenaten was trying to erase. You cannot build a new world on top of the old one. So Akhenaten did something breathtaking. He left. Around the 5th year of his reign, he chose a site in Middle Egypt, empty desert on the east bank of the Nile, ground that had never belonged to any god. No temples to demolish, no priesthood to fight. A blank page. He named it Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, the place where the sun disk rises. Today, we call it Amarna, and he marked it. Around the new city, he had enormous markers carved straight into the cliffs. Great stone tablets, the boundary stele, showing the royal family worshipping the Aten and covered in text. On them, the king swore a sacred oath. People often tell this part as Akhenaten swore he would never leave the city. That is not quite what the stones say. What he swore was that the city's borders would stay exactly where he had set them, that he would never push them beyond these markers and never let them fall into ruin. This ground between these stones would belong to the Aten forever. He was binding himself, his family, and his god to this single spot on earth. He meant it to last for eternity. It would not outlive him by more than a few years. And every promise carved into those cliffs, history was about to break. Now came the impossible part: building a capital city fast. Normally, a great Egyptian temple took decades, sometimes far longer. Vast stone blocks dragged and levered into place across the reigns of several kings. Akhenaten did not have decades. He had urgency, so his builders changed the method itself. Instead of colossal blocks, they used small, standardized stones, each about the size that a single man could lift and carry on his own. Archaeologists call them talatat.
Well, Akhenaten, powerful man. I still ain't found out what he is, a god or what, so let's keep on going.
Small, standardized stones, each about the size that a single man could lift and carry on his own. Archaeologists call them talatat. With thousands of workers, each carrying block after block, walls went up at a speed Egypt had never seen. A whole city, temples, palaces, suburbs, rose out of bare desert in a handful of years. And the temples themselves were unlike anything before. Egyptian temples were dark, a journey from sunlight into deeper and deeper shadow, ending in a hidden sanctuary where only the priests could go, where a statue of the god sat in blackness. Akhenaten's temples had no roofs. They were open courtyards flooded with sunlight, with hundreds of offering tables standing under the open sky. There was no statue of the Aten, because the Aten was right there above you, blazing, impossible to miss. You did not walk into the dark to find God. You stood in the light, the city filled with life. Wide ceremonial roads for the king's chariot, palaces with floors painted in reeds and birds and water. Workshops where sculptors carved new faces in the new style. And out at the edge, a whole village for the laborers and craftsmen who actually made it all. For a few short years, in the middle of the desert, the strangest experiment in the ancient world was actually working. And at the center of it stood not one figure, but two. Something else broke with tradition in Akhenaten's city. The way the royal family was shown. For 3,000 years, pharaohs were depicted as remote and superhuman, frozen in stiff, formal poses. Akhenaten threw that out too. On the walls of Amarna, we suddenly see the king as a husband and a father. We see him lifting his small daughters, kissing them, holding them in his lap. We see him and his queen sitting together, relaxed, their children climbing over them. Above them, the Aten reaches down, its rays ending in tiny human hands, offering the sign of life to the family's faces. No Egyptian art had ever felt this intimate. It still feels intimate, 3,000 years later. And beside the king, in scene after scene, stands his queen, Nefertiti. Her name means the beautiful one has come. And in this city, she is everywhere. Not as a quiet figure in the background, but as a power in her own right. She is shown the same size as the king, worshipping the Aten beside him, and in some scenes, even in the pose of a pharaoh striking down enemies. Some scholars believe she ruled as Akhenaten's near equal, and may have ruled in her own name after him. And then there is the hymn. The Great Hymn to the Aten, a long and beautiful poem credited to Akhenaten himself, praising the sun disk as the maker of all life, who forms the child in the womb and the chick in the egg, who lights every land and loves every creature. Read it beside one of the Psalms of the Hebrew Bible, Psalm 104, and the echoes are startling. Some lines run almost in parallel. Scholars have argued about that connection for more than a century, and it is one of the reasons that old question keeps coming back, the one we planted earlier. Was this just a king inventing a religion? Or was he something his own people would one day be too frightened to name? From inside the city, under the open sky, everything looked perfect. From outside, Egypt was bleeding. Start with money. For centuries, the temples had been the engine of the Egyptian economy. They stored grain, employed thousands, and ran much of daily life. When Akhenaten shut down the temples of Amun and the other gods and poured everything into the Aten, he didn't only offend the priests, he pulled the financial floor out from under ordinary Egyptians. Priests, craftsmen, and temple workers across the country lost their livelihood almost overnight. Now look beyond the borders. We actually have Akhenaten's foreign mail. In the ruins of Amarna, archaeologists found a royal archive. Hundreds of clay tablets written in cuneiform, the diplomatic letters between Egypt and the other powers and vassal kings of the age. We call them the Amarna letters, and in places they are desperate. Egypt's allies and vassal rulers in the lands of Canaan and Syria write again and again, begging for help. Enemies are taking their cities. Send troops, send gold, send anything. One ruler writes that the king's lands are slipping away and pleads simply for an answer. And from Egypt, the superpower, the richest throne on earth, too often the answer is silence. While the king gazes into the sun in his perfect new city, the empire his ancestors built is quietly coming apart at the edges. The most radical religious vision the ancient world had ever produced was being paid for by people who never agreed to it. Akhenaten kept his eyes fixed on the light, and under his feet the country was falling apart. Around the 17th year of his reign, Akhenaten disappears from the record. He dies, and we are not even certain how. There are hints in those final years of disaster inside the city. Some scholars suspect an epidemic swept through the ancient Near East and reached Amarna. Members of the royal family vanish from the records in quick succession, including several of his own daughters. The perfect city may have become a city of the dying. What follows is one of the most confusing stretches in all of Egyptian history. There are one or two shadowy successors, names like Smenkhkare, and a mysterious ruler called Nefer-Nefru-Aten, who some researchers believe may have been Nefertiti herself, reigning under a new name. And then the throne passes to a child, a little boy named Tutankhaten, the living image of the Aten. That boy would become the most famous pharaoh in the world, but not for anything he believed. Under his advisors, the experiment is quietly reversed. The old gods are restored, Amun comes back, and the boy king changes his name to scrub the Aten out of it. Tutankhaten becomes Tutankhamun. The court abandons the city in the desert and moves back to the old centers of power. The lights of Akhenaten go out. And here is one of the great mysteries. Akhenaten had a magnificent royal tomb prepared in the cliffs behind his city. When it was found, his body was not in it. It was empty. So where is he? The strongest candidate is a battered, stripped mummy found in a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, known only by a number, KV55. In 2010, DNA testing suggested this man was the son of an earlier pharaoh and queen, and the father of Tutankhamun. Exactly what Akhenaten should be. Many experts think it is him. Others still aren't convinced and argue it could be a brother or a successor. After 3,000 years, we still cannot say for certain that we have found the body of the heretic king. He spent his whole life trying to control how he would be remembered. He didn't even get to control where he was buried. The kings who came after did not simply move on. They went to war with his memory. Once the dust settled, the rulers who followed, and above all, a general-turned-pharaoh named Horemheb, and later the kings of the Ramesside line, set out to erase Akhenaten completely. His beautiful city was not just abandoned, it was dismantled. Workers pulled it apart, stone by stone, and those small, convenient talatat blocks, so easy to carry up, were just as easy to carry away. They were hauled off and reused as cheap fill inside the monuments of other kings. His statues were smashed. His name and his sun god the Aten were chiseled out of inscriptions. And when later scribes drew up the official lists of Egypt's kings, the records of who had legitimately ruled, they simply left him out. The years of Akhenaten and his immediate successors were folded into other reigns, as if that time had never happened. In the few places he could not be ignored, he was not called by name. He was that criminal, the enemy of Akhenaten. Think about what that means. This is one of the earliest, most deliberate attempts in human history to delete a person from the record. Not just to defeat him, but to make it as though he had never existed at all. A coordinated erasure of a king, a queen, a city, and a god. It very nearly worked. For more than 3,000 years, the world forgot that Akhenaten had ever lived. They had the chisels, they had the power, they had the centuries, and still they failed. Here is the irony that ends the story. The thing that was meant to bury Akhenaten is exactly what saved him. Because the city was abandoned and left to the desert, it was never built over. No later capital rose on top of it to grind it to dust. The sand simply rolled in and covered everything and held it, almost untouched, for 3,000 years, frozen almost exactly as it had been on the day it was left. And slowly, it came back. In 1887, a local woman digging in the ruins found those clay tablets, the Amarna letters, and the lost diplomatic voice of a vanished age suddenly spoke again. Then, on the 6th of December 1912, a German team digging in the workshop of a sculptor named Tutmosis lifted out of the sand a painted limestone bust of a woman, Nefertiti. Her face, one eye still left unfinished, became almost overnight one of the most famous images on Earth. The queen the pharaohs tried to erase is now instantly recognized by millions who have never heard of the man who tried to erase her. But notice something. We found her face. We have never, for certain, found her. To this day, no one can point to Nefertiti's tomb and say with certainty, she is here. One battered mummy from the Valley of the Kings, the younger lady, was once announced as Nefertiti, but the DNA pointed somewhere else. In 2015, a respected Egyptologist argued she might be hidden behind a wall in Tutankhamun's tomb. The radar scans that followed came back contradictory, then empty. The most famous face of the ancient world still has no grave we can name. So the experiment failed. The city fell. The names were chiseled away, the body lost, the queen's tomb still missing. By every measure, the men who set out to erase him should have won. And yet, the very thing that was meant to bury him is exactly what kept him. It hid his city and his lost queen, and held them safe until the day the world was ready to look again.
All right, man. Akhenaten, man. That was something. We learned a little bit about him, about his history, about his wife, about, his life, his children, but where is he and where is Nefertiti? Where is Akhenaten's body and where is Nefertiti's body? Will we ever find out? As soon as they do, I'll let you guys know. But thank you guys for tuning in to my channel once again. Don't forget to hit that like button, thumb it up, hit the notification, subscribe to my channel, and y'all stay up and keep it alive. You hear me? Let's stick together in this thing. Let's find out what's real and what's not. See you next time. Peace.